The single dad CEO pretends to be blind to test who'll help, but only the quiet maid takes his hand and softly says, "Don't worry, sir." The marble lobby of Sterling Tower gleamed under crystal chandeliers, but Michael Sterling couldn't see any of it, not because he was blind, though that's what everyone believed as he stood there, sunglasses hiding his eyes, white cane trembling in his grip. He was testing them. All of them, 50 employees passed him in the first 10 minutes. He heard their designer shoes clicking against marble, smelled their expensive cologne, felt the rush of air as they hurried past. Not one stopped. His own executives, the ones who smiled at every board meeting, who called him visionary and brilliant, walked right by the man they thought was just another disabled visitor who'd wandered into the wrong building. Michael's jaw tightened. 6 months ago, his wife Catherine died in a car accident, leaving him with their 4-year-old daughter Emma and a company worth billions. 6 months of people whispering behind his back, wondering if he was still fit to lead, if grief had broken him. He'd heard it all. But what he hadn't known, what he needed to know, was whether anyone in his empire actually had a heart. The answer apparently was no. "Excuse me," he called out, voice deliberately shaking. "Can someone help me? I'm lost." A woman laughed nearby, actually laughed, and kept walking. A security guard glanced over but was immediately distracted by his phone. Michael's hand tightened on the cane until his knuckles went white. Emma deserved better than this. She deserved to grow up in a world where people still cared about each other, where compassion wasn't a forgotten language. Then he heard her, soft footsteps, hesitant but coming closer. Presence stopped beside him, radiating warmth in the cold lobby. "Don't worry, sir." The voice was gentle, almost musical. "I've got you." A hand, small, work-roughened, carefully took his elbow. Not grabbing, not pulling, just guiding. Like he was something precious that might break. "I'm Grace," she continued quietly. "I'm going to help you find where you need to go. Is that okay?" Michael's throat constricted. In 17 years of running Sterling Enterprises, surrounded by thousands of employees, this was the first voice that sounded like it actually gave a damn. "Yes," he managed. "Thank you." Grace's touch was feather-light as she guided him toward a bench. "Let's sit down for a moment. You seem shaken." "There's no rush." She sat beside him and he caught the scent of lavender and something else. Cleaning solution. "Can you tell me who you're here to see? I can call someone for you." Through his dark glasses, Michael studied her. Early 30s maybe, wearing a simple gray uniform with a name tag that read housekeeping. Dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. No makeup, no jewelry except a thin silver cross. Her eyes, warm brown and impossibly kind, held nothing but genuine concern. Everyone else saw an obstacle. She saw a person. Michael's planned script dissolved. "I'm here to see Michael Sterling." "The CEO," Grace's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mr. Sterling? That's quite a meeting. Do you have an appointment?" You could say that. Something in his tone made her tilt her head, studying him with those perceptive eyes. But she didn't push. Instead, she pulled out her phone, an old model, cracked screen, and dialed. "Hi, Mr. Chen. This is Grace from housekeeping. I have a gentleman in the lobby who needs to see Mr. Sterling. He seems important." A pause. "Yes, I'll wait with him." She hung up and turned back to Michael with an apologetic smile. "His assistant is checking the schedule. It might be a few minutes. Would you like some water? Coffee? Why are you doing this?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Grace looked surprised. "Doing what?" "Helping me. You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." Her expression softened into something that made Michael's chest ache. "Sir, you're not nobody. You're someone who needed help, and I could give it. That's all that matters." She paused, then added quietly, "My daddy always said the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching. It's what they do when nobody is." Michael turned away, suddenly unable to meet those honest eyes even through his sunglasses. Because she was wrong about one thing: everyone was watching. They just didn't know it yet. Grace stayed with him for 20 minutes while the executive floor sorted out the confusion. Michael could have revealed himself at any moment, could have ended the charade with a single word. But he didn't, because for the first time in 6 months, maybe longer, Someone was treating him like a human being instead of a title. "I'm sorry this is taking so long," Grace said, checking her watch nervously. "I should actually be on the 15th floor right now. We're short-staffed today, and there's this big conference room that needs—" She stopped herself, laughing softly. "Sorry, you don't need to hear about my problems." "I don't mind," Michael said honestly. "Tell me." She hesitated, then her words came in a gentle stream. She'd worked at Sterling Tower for 3 years, always the early morning shift so she could be home when her nephew got off the school bus. Her sister had disappeared 2 years ago, addiction. Grace's voice cracked slightly, leaving behind a 7-year-old boy named Tyler, who now called Grace Mom, even though she'd never officially adopted him. "The courts are complicated when you're just an aunt," she explained, "and when you're an aunt who cleans offices for minimum wage. But Tyler's in a good school now. He's safe. That's what matters." Michael's heart hammered. He made more in a day than Grace probably made in a year. Yet she spoke about her life with more richness, more purpose, than any board member ever had about their stock portfolios. "You must love him very much," he said, "more than anything." Grace's voice was fierce with it. "He's been through so much. Lost his mom, doesn't remember his dad, but he's so smart, so kind. Last week he gave his lunch to a girl at school who forgot hers. Came home hungry but smiling because he'd helped someone." She laughed again, this time with unmistakable pride. "He reminds me why the hard days are worth it." Before Michael could respond, his executive assistant James Chen appeared, slightly out of breath and very confused. "Sir, I don't show any appointments for—" He stopped dead when he saw Michael. The sunglasses, the cane. His face went pale. "Oh my God, Mr. Sterling? We didn't recognize, nobody told us you were—" Michael held up one hand, silencing him. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his sunglasses. Grace gasped softly beside him. "This is Grace," Michael said to James, his voice cold and executive sharp now. "In the past 20 minutes, she's shown more compassion and professionalism than anyone else in this building. Including you." James's mouth opened and closed. Around them, the lobby had gone silent. Employees frozen mid-step, staring. Michael stood, no longer playing the part of someone who needed guidance. "I wasn't lost, Grace. I was testing this company. Testing whether anyone here remembered what it means to be human." He turned to face the crowd that had gathered. 53 people passed me. 53, only one stopped. The shame on their faces was palpable. Michael felt no satisfaction in it. He turned back to Grace, whose brown eyes were wide with shock. "You mentioned Tyler's in a good school now. Which one?" She blinked rapidly. "Westfield Elementary." "But Mr. Sterling, you don't need to. And you're fighting for legal custody?" "Yes, but James." Michael's voice cut through the whispers. "Get our legal team on the phone. I want them to handle Grace's custody case. Pro bono. Whatever it takes." He looked at Grace again, and his expression softened. "You shouldn't have to fight the system alone. Not when you're doing something so important." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. I can't afford—" "You already paid," Michael said quietly. "With 20 minutes of kindness when nobody else would spare 5 seconds. But what happened next changed everything." A man pushed through the crowd, Richard Blackwell, Michael's chief financial officer. Expensive suit, practiced smile, eyes like chips of ice. "Michael, this is very touching," Richard said smoothly. "But perhaps we should discuss this in private. We have the Henderson merger meeting in an hour, and this situation is creating quite a scene." The way he said situation, looking at Grace like she was something unsanitary, made Michael's blood boil. "This situation," Michael said dangerously, "is the most important thing happening in this building today." Richard's smile thinned. "Of course. I only meant—" His eyes flickered to Grace and something cruel passed across his face. "Actually, now that I think about it, isn't there a policy about employees accepting gifts from management? The union might see this legal assistance as improper. We wouldn't want Grace to lose her job over a misunderstanding." The threat hung in the air like poison. Grace stood quickly, wiping her eyes. "It's okay, Mr. Sterling, really. I appreciate the thought, but Mr. Blackwell is right. I can't risk my job. Tyler needs—" "Grace," Michael interrupted, his mind already working through the implications. Richard wasn't concerned about policy. He was concerned about something else, something that made him want to keep Grace powerless and invisible. The question was, why? Michael had built a billion-dollar empire by reading people, by seeing the truth beneath polished surfaces. And right now, watching Richard Blackwell smile that practiced smile, every instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. "Everyone, back to work," Michael announced, his CEO voice brooking no argument. "Grace, please come with me. Richard, James, my office, now." As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Grace stood as far from the executives as possible, hands clasped tight, eyes downcast. She looked so small in her gray uniform, surrounded by tailored suits and power plays. But Michael had learned something today. Small didn't mean weak. Emma had taught him that. 4 years old and barely 3 feet tall, yet she'd held him together through the darkest nights after Catherine died. When he couldn't eat, she'd brought him her teddy bear. When he couldn't sleep, she'd sung the lullabies her mother used to sing. Children understood what adults forgot. That strength wasn't about size or wealth. It was about showing up, like Grace had shown up. In his office, Michael gestured Grace to a chair while Richard and James stood, shifting uncomfortably. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan sprawled below them, a city of millions where people like Grace disappeared into the machinery every day. "Richard," Michael began, settling behind his desk. "Tell me about our housekeeping staff. Policies, procedures, everything." What?" Richard's confusion seemed genuine. "Michael, I'm CFO, that's HR's domain. I barely interact with—" "Yet you knew union policies regarding gifts, specific ones." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I familiarize myself with all company policies. Due diligence." Michael turned to James. "Pull Grace's employment file, everything from the day she was hired." As James hurried out, Grace finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Sterling, I really should get back to work. I don't understand what's happening, but—" "Do you know Richard Blackwell?" Michael asked her directly. She glanced at Richard, then quickly away. "Not personally. He's an executive. I clean the executive floor. Have you ever had any interaction with him?" Grace's hands twisted in her lap. "A few times. Brief." "Tell me about them." The silence stretched. Richard shifted his weight, and Michael caught it, the tiniest flash of warning in his eyes as he looked at Grace. The message was clear. Keep quiet, which meant there was something to tell. "Grace," Michael said gently, "I need you to trust me. Whatever happened, whatever he said, you're protected now. I give you my word." Her eyes filled with tears again. "He'll fire me. Tyler, I own this company. He can't fire anyone without my approval." Michael leaned forward. "Please." Grace took a shuddering breath. 6 months ago, Tyler got really sick. Pneumonia, the emergency room, antibiotics, follow-up appointments. It was thousands of dollars. I don't have insurance that covers dependents who aren't legally mine. I was drowning in debt and She closed her eyes. "I asked HR about an advance on my paycheck. They said they couldn't help. But someone mentioned that Mr. Blackwell sometimes provided personal loans to employees in need." Michael's blood went cold. "Personal loans. He was so kind at first," Grace continued, the words tumbling out now. "He said he understood what it was like to struggle, that he wanted to help. He gave me $5,000. No contract, no papers, just cash and a handshake." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But then he said I had to pay it back within 6 months, with 30% interest, and if I couldn't, I'd have to." She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. "To what, Grace?" Michael's voice was ice. "To be available, to keep him company. He said nobody would believe me if I told, because he's an executive and I'm nobody. He said there were no records, no proof, just my word against his." Richard exploded. "This is insane. Michael, she's clearly lying to manipulate you into—" "How much have you paid back?" Michael asked Grace, ignoring Richard completely. $3,000. I've been putting every spare dollar toward it, working double shifts. I have 3 months left, but I don't know if I can make it, and he keeps finding reasons to talk to me when I'm alone, And last week Her voice broke. I'm so scared. But if I lose this job, I lose Tyler. The courts will never give me custody without steady employment. James returned then, tablet in hand, and his face was pale. Sir, you need to see this. Michael took the tablet. Grace's file was minimal. Basic employment information, time cards, performance reviews. All excellent. But James had pulled something else. Richard's expense reports. Personal advances to 11 different employees over the past 3 years. All women, all housekeeping or food service staff. All paid in cash with no formal documentation. Amounts ranging from $3,000 to $10,000. Michael's hands shook as he scrolled. Catherine's face flashed in his mind. She'd volunteered at women's shelters, had seen this pattern of predation countless times. Powerful men targeting vulnerable women, using money as a weapon, creating situations where victims felt they had no choice but to comply or lose everything. He'd promised her, as she died in his arms, that he'd raise Emma in a world that was better. That was safer. That actually protected people who needed it. He'd broken that promise, right here in his own building, under his own roof, while he was too buried in grief and spreadsheets to notice. Richard, Michael said quietly, and the tone made everyone in the room freeze. You're done. Security will escort you out. You have 1 hour to remove your personal belongings. James, call our legal team and the police. I want a full investigation. Into every loan, every interaction, You can't do this. Richard's polished veneer cracked completely. I have a contract. I have rights. You think some cleaning lady's sob story is enough to... Michael stood, and the weight of his fury filled the room. Get out of my building. If you ever contact Grace or any of these other women again, I will personally ensure you never work anywhere in this city. Do you understand me? Richard's face twisted with rage, but he was smart enough to recognize defeat. As security led him away, Michael sank back into his chair, suddenly exhausted. Grace was crying openly now. I thought nobody would believe me. I believe you, Michael said firmly. And I'm sorry, this should never have happened. This will never happen again. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Thank you. Thank you so much. But as the adrenaline faded, Michael realized something else. Grace had helped him when she thought he was nobody, just a stranger who needed guidance. She'd risked being late to work, had stayed with him despite her own pressing responsibilities. She'd done that while carrying this weight, this fear, this impossible burden. That took a kind of strength Michael was only beginning to understand. The story should have ended there. Villain defeated, victim protected, justice served. But life, Michael was learning, rarely followed narrative convenience. Over the next 2 weeks, as legal proceedings moved forward, and the other women came forward with their own stories, Michael found himself thinking about Grace constantly. He told himself it was professional concern. He'd ordered James to ensure she was comfortable, to provide trauma counseling, to guarantee her job security, and give her a substantial raise. He'd even moved her to a day shift position with better hours, so she could be home when Tyler got off the bus. But it was more than that. He started finding excuses to visit the 15th floor, checking on the new conference room setup, reviewing office layouts, always happening to run into Grace as she worked, and they'd talk. Just brief conversations, how Tyler was doing in school, well, but struggling with math, what books she was reading to him, currently Charlotte's Web, whether the custody case was progressing, slowly but positively. Simple things, human things, the kind of conversations he'd stopped having after Catherine died, when every interaction became about business or pity. Grace never treated him like a CEO. She treated him like Michael. One Thursday afternoon, Emma's nanny called in sick. Michael stared at his phone, at the calendar full of critical meetings, and felt the familiar panic rising. He couldn't cancel. The Henderson merger was finally moving forward. But Emma was only 4. He couldn't leave her with strangers, Mr. Sterling. Grace appeared in his doorway, tablet in hand with the afternoon's cleaning schedule. Is everything okay? You look stressed. My nanny's sick and I have back-to-back meetings until 7. He ran a hand through his hair. I don't know what to do. Grace didn't hesitate. Bring her here. What? Bring Emma to work. I'm on this floor all afternoon. I can watch her while I work. She smiled. Tyler and I would love to meet her. And your office has those big windows. She can color while you're in meetings. Michael stared at her. Grace, you're already doing so much, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Her brown eyes were warm. Besides, I have a feeling Emma and Tyler would get along great. An hour later, Emma was sitting cross-legged on Michael's office floor, surrounded by coloring books and crayons, chattering away to Grace while Grace dusted the bookshelves. Tyler had come straight from school, homework spread across the coffee table, occasionally piping up with questions that made both Emma and Grace giggle. Michael tried to focus on his conference call about quarterly projections, but his eyes kept drifting to the scene in his office. Emma hadn't laughed like that, bright and unguarded, since Catherine died. Grace moved around the room with practiced efficiency, but she stopped every few minutes to admire Emma's drawings or help Tyler with a math problem, giving each child her complete attention as if they were the most important things in the world. Because to her, Michael realized they were. When the call finally ended, he found Emma asleep on the couch, her head on Grace's lap while Grace read Charlotte's Web aloud to Tyler. The late afternoon sun poured through the windows, turning everything golden, and for a moment Michael couldn't breathe. It looked like family. Grace glanced up and saw him watching. She carefully extracted herself from under Emma, tucking a blanket. Where had she gotten a blanket? Around his daughter. She's wonderful, Grace whispered, moving to where Michael stood. Smart, funny kind. You're raising her beautifully. I'm trying, Michael said hoarsely. Some days I have no idea what I'm doing. That's every parent, Grace smiled. The fact that you care so much means you're doing it right. They stood there in the golden light, two people who'd found each other by chance, or maybe by something more deliberate than chance. Two people who'd both learned that strength sometimes looked like vulnerability, and kindness sometimes looked like a hand reaching out in a marble lobby. Grace, Michael began, then stopped. 'Cause what was he doing? She was his employee. She'd been through trauma in this very building. The last thing she needed was her boss making things complicated with feelings that probably stemmed from gratitude or guilt or... I know, Grace said softly, and her eyes held understanding that terrified him, because it meant she felt it too. I know, Michael, but it's too fast, too complicated. You're my boss. You're grieving. I'm dealing with Richard's investigation in the custody case. We can't... I know, he agreed, even though everything in him screamed to disagree. You're right. I'm sorry. Shouldn't have. Don't apologize for making me feel seen. Grace reached out just for a moment and squeezed his hand. You've done so much for me and Tyler. Let that be enough for now. Let's just see what happens, Michael nodded, even though enough felt like the wrong word when Emma was sleeping peacefully for the first time in months, and Tyler was carefully arranging crayons by color, and Grace was standing in his office like she'd always been, meant to be there. But Grace was right. Trauma and grief and power dynamics. These things needed time. Healing needed space, so he'd wait. He'd give her that space, that time, that choice. Even if every instinct told him he'd already found something he'd stopped believing existed. A person who saw him, truly saw him, and chose to reach out anyway. Tyler looked up from his homework then, grinning. Mr. Sterling? Grace says you own this whole building. That's so cool. Do you have a slide instead of an elevator? And just like that, the moment shifted from heavy to light. Michael laughed, actually laughed for the first time in months. No slide, he said, crouching down to Tyler's level. But I have a helipad on the roof. Want to see it? The boy's eyes went wide as saucers. Maybe, Michael thought as Grace smiled at him over Tyler's head. Maybe healing didn't have to be a solitary journey. Maybe sometimes the bravest thing was letting someone else walk beside you. Even if, especially if, you didn't know where the path would lead. 3 months passed like pages turning in a story Michael didn't know he was writing. Richard Blackwell's trial became national news. 9 women came forward, and Michael's legal team ensured every one of them had representation and protection. The investigation revealed a pattern that stretched back 7 years, long before Michael had become CEO. Buried in the bureaucratic machinery, he'd been too focused on profits to notice. That knowledge sat heavy in his chest. He'd been so concerned with market shares and growth strategies that he'd missed the rot in his own foundation. But he was fixing it now. New HR policies, anonymous reporting systems, mandatory training for all executives, and a victim's assistance fund that Catherine would have been proud of. She'd always said that a company's worth wasn't measured in dollars, but in how it treated the people. Nobody noticed Grace had finally gotten custody of Tyler. Michael had been there in the courtroom when the judge made it official, watching Grace cry as Tyler threw his arms around her neck and called her Mom for the first time in front of witnesses who mattered. The legal team Michael provided had been thorough, documenting Grace's dedication, her stable employment, the loving home she'd created. The judge had actually smiled when delivering the verdict. "This," she'd said, looking at Grace, "is what family looks like." Michael thought about those words often now, especially on Friday evenings when Emma insisted that Grace and Tyler come for dinner. It had started casually, a thank you dinner that turned into another, then another, until it became tradition. Tyler and Emma were inseparable now, creating elaborate crayon drawings and putting on shows that consisted mostly of giggling and costume changes. Tonight, Emma was teaching Tyler to make chocolate chip cookies, while Grace helped Michael with the dishes. Through the kitchen window, autumn leaves swirled in the courtyard of his penthouse. He'd moved out of the sterile corporate apartment after Catherine died, finding this place that felt more like a home. High ceilings, yes, but also warm lighting and comfortable furniture, and a kitchen big enough for a 4-year-old to make enormous messes. "Tyler's asking about soccer," Grace said, drawing a plate with practiced efficiency. "Apparently Emma is on a team?" "She is, terrible at it. Spends most of the game picking dandelions." Michael smiled. "But she loves it." "Tyler should join. I can talk to the coach." "Michael." Grace set down the plate. "You can't solve everything with phone calls and connections." "I can try, I know. And I love that about you." She paused and the words hung between them. Love, casual, but not casual at all. "But sometimes Tyler needs to figure things out himself. Ask me first before you go making things happen, okay?" "Okay," Michael agreed, understanding the deeper conversation. Grace was fiercely protective of Tyler's autonomy, of teaching him resilience instead of dependence. It was one of the 1,000 things Michael had learned about her in these months. The way she thought, the way she loved, the way she refused to let anyone, even someone trying to help, diminish her or Tyler's agency. She'd taught him that strength and vulnerability weren't opposites. They were partners. "I've been thinking," Michael said carefully, "about something Emma's therapist said, about grief and moving forward and how healing isn't betrayal." Grace turned to face him fully. "Yeah, Catherine loved love stories. Romantic comedies, novels, the works. Used to drive me crazy." He smiled at the memory. "But she told me once near the end that if something happened to her, she wanted Emma to see me happy again. She said Emma shouldn't grow up thinking love was something you got once and then mourned forever." She sounds like she was wise. She was. Michael took a breath. "And terrifying. Because I think she'd really like you. And that's somehow scarier than thinking she'd disapprove." Grace's eyes glistened. "I think about that too. About whether this is real," Michael finished. "Whether we're building something genuine or just clinging to each other because we're both tired of being alone." In the other room, Emma shrieked with laughter as Tyler apparently added too much flour and created a small explosion. The sound filled the apartment with life. "I don't have the answer," Michael admitted. "But I know that when you're here, Emma laughs. And when you're not, I count the hours until you come back. I know that Tyler asks me about helicopter rotor speeds and Emma teaches him playground politics, and somehow that feels like the most important work I do all week." He moved closer. "I know that 6 months ago I was pretending to be blind to test humanity, and you were the only one who passed. And maybe that's not chance. Maybe that's Grace." Tyler's voice called from the kitchen. "The cookies are smoking." They rushed in to find the oven billowing with the scent of burnt chocolate. Emma and Tyler stood there covered in flour, looking guilty and defiant and absolutely perfect. We wanted them extra crispy, Emma explained seriously. Mission accomplished, Michael said, opening windows while Grace carefully removed the charcoal remains. They ordered pizza instead, ate it on the living room floor while watching an animated movie that Tyler and Emma had chosen after an elaborate negotiation that involved charts. Michael found himself not watching the screen but watching Grace, the way she laughed at the funny parts, the way she unconsciously braided Emma's hair while Emma leaned against her, the way she caught his eye and smiled like they were sharing a secret. Maybe they were. After the kids fell asleep, Emma on the couch, Tyler in a nest of blankets on the floor, Michael and Grace stood together on the balcony, the city spreading before them like scattered stars. My daddy's saying, Grace said quietly, about how a person's measure isn't what they do when everyone's watching. I've been thinking about the rest of it. The rest? The measure of a person is also what they do after they fail. How they fix things. How they grow. She turned to him. You could have been angry when you realized Richard had been hurting women in your building. You could have quietly fired him and buried it to protect the company's reputation. But you didn't. You exposed it. You helped us. You changed the entire culture because you decided that doing the right thing mattered more than protecting your image. That's just basic decency, Michael protested. No. Grace shook her head. Basic decency is helping a blind man in a lobby. What you did, that's courage. That's character. That's the kind of man I want Tyler to grow up seeing, so he knows what strength actually looks like. Michael's throat tightened. I don't know what I'm doing half the time. With Emma, with the company, with this. He gestured between them. But I know I want to figure it out. With you. If you'll let me. Grace was quiet for a long moment and Michael's heart hammered because maybe he'd pushed too fast. Maybe she wasn't ready, maybe. My lease is up next month, she said finally. Tyler and I are looking at apartments, but everything in a good school district is so expensive. And I don't want to use your money because that feels like I'm taking advantage of. Move in here. Grace's eyes went wide. What? Move in here, not. Michael stumbled over the words. There are 4 bedrooms. You and Tyler could have your own space. Emma would be thrilled. We could see if he took a breath. Or I could buy you an apartment outright, no strings. Just help because you're my friend and Tyler deserves stability and. Michael. Grace put a hand on his chest, over his racing heart. Breathe, he breathed. I don't want you to buy me things, she said gently. And I don't want to move in as your employee or your charity case. If we do this, if Tyler and Emma and you and I become something together, it needs to be real, equal, messy, and complicated and real. Yes, Michael said immediately. That's what I want. Exactly that. Even though I burn cookies and work weird hours and have a 7-year-old who asks a million questions. Especially because of that. Grace smiled and it was like the sun rising. Then ask me again. In a month or 2 months or whenever it feels right. Ask me like you're asking Grace the person, not Grace the employee you feel responsible for, and I'll give you an answer. I can do that, Michael promised, understanding that she was giving them both the gift of time. Time to be sure, to be ready, to build something that would last not because it was convenient or comfortable, but because it was chosen. Behind them, through the glass doors, Emma stirred and mumbled something in her sleep. Tyler's hand reached out instinctively and found hers, and they settled back into quiet rest. They're already family, Grace whispered. Yeah, Michael agreed. They are. And maybe that was the real story. Not a CEO who tested his employees or a maid who showed compassion, but 2 people who'd been broken by loss and fear, who'd found each other in a moment of truth, and who were brave enough to believe that healing could look like hand-holding in a marble lobby, like burnt cookies and pizza on the floor, like taking time to build something real. Sometimes heroes didn't wear capes or medals. Sometimes they just reached out a hand and said, "Don't worry, sir, I've got you." And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that hand held on and helped you find your way back to a life worth living. Not the life you'd lost, but a new one built on honesty and choice, and the radical act of letting yourself be seen. Michael looked at Grace, at the city below, at the sleeping children inside, and thought this is what Catherine meant, not forgetting, not replacing, but honoring love by choosing it again, in a new form, with a person who understood that the measure of a life wasn't perfection, but persistence. The courage to keep reaching out, even when you'd been hurt, even when you were scared, even when you weren't sure you deserved another chance. Grace squeezed his hand, and Michael squeezed back. And in that moment, beneath a sky full of stars, two people who'd both learned what it meant to be truly seen decided to keep seeing each other. One day. One burnt cookie, one honest conversation at a time until, don't worry, Sir became I've got you became we've got each other. And that, Michael thought, was a story worth telling.